If you are really thirsty, how much would you pay for a glass of water? $2, $5, or maybe even more? How much should we spend to make sure that the water is safe to drink? A high value is placed on clean supply of water, but it's not something we think about very much. Water coming out of a tap is taken for granted, but it takes a lot of work and money to provide it. If the water entering a treatment plant is clean as possible, then it will be less expensive to treat in order to make it safe to drink. So how can we protect the sources of our drinking water? A lot of Saskatchewan's water supplies come from the Western Mountains, where melting snow and ice feed rivers like North and South Saskatchewan. As well, groundwater, some of it thousands of years old, is pumped to the surface. Both the river water and the groundwater are part of watersheds, large areas of land that drain towards low places like a river or a lake. Watersheds are the source of our drinking water. Grasslands, along with cropland, towns, and cities, are parts of watersheds. Some parts don't contribute to our water quality. The hard surfaces in cities cause water to run off the land quickly, carrying oil, lawn fertilizers, and litter. Annual cropland may add fertilizer and pesticide residues and eroded soil to run off water. Native grasslands, on the other hand, provide us with very important water protection services without an input of expensive machinery or energy. These grasslands, along with the moist riparian areas that form green ribbons along rivers or wrap around wetlands, help purify and store water as well as reduce flood damage. Prairie wool, that's what settlers called the grasslands that carpeted the prairie before agriculture changed the landscape. It provided food for their cattle and sheep. Prairie grasses are tough native plants able to take long spells of drought, yet ready in an instant to take advantage of any moisture. They flourish the prairie, some with short roots near the surface to suck up any rainfall. Others with long roots reaching for moisture deep in the ground. The grasses of the prairie will protect the soil from erosion. Imagine a raindrop hurtling towards bare ground. Upon impact, the raindrop forms a hard-bottomed crater in the soil and sends a spray of fine soil particles into the air, which fall into new positions. If there is any slope, then those particles shift downhill, causing erosion. A very heavy rainstorm can disturb as much as 225 tons of soil per hectare, some of which may end up as sediments in rivers and creeks. These fine sediments can absorb nutrients and chemicals that have a very negative impact on water quality. Imagine another raindrop hurtling towards the ground covered with native prairie grasses. The impact of the raindrop is absorbed by the soft prairie wool, so no crater is formed in the soil. Water is able to infiltrate this soil. Even the dead grasses from the previous summer soak up the rain like paper towel. Less water runoffs, reducing the chance of flooding downstream. Wetlands are the real sponges of our native prairie. Many of them are thousands of years old. Giant chunks of ice from melting glaciers became covered in sand and gravel and took years to melt. Left behind were holes, potholes that became the sloughs and ponds that dot the prairies. Wetlands are filled with aquatic plants like pondweeds and duckweed, and emergent plants like cattails and sedges. All this plant matter, both living and dead, soaks up water from rainstorms and snowmelt, preventing it from running off down the slope. During drought, the water is slowly released back into the surrounding landscape. Although a slough might smell bad, water that has filtered through it has generally been cleaned of many pollutants such as fertilizers and other chemicals. Just think, some of the water you drink today might have been filtered through a wetland long ago. Wetlands are habitats for hundreds of species of wildlife. So many ducks nest on prairie wetlands that is called a duck factory. One reason that ducks flock to wetlands is what is found beneath the water. A quick scoop with a net in a wetland will produce a collection of some of the weirdest looking creatures you can imagine. These are aquatic macroinvertebrates, organisms like insects and crustaceans that you can see without a microscope. They are a very important part of many food chains. Ducks depend on them for protein, especially during the nesting season. Different macroinvertebrates have different tolerances to the amount of dissolved oxygen and nutrients such as nitrates and phosphates in the water. A bloodworm lives in water with low oxygen and high nutrient levels, which are found in some healthy wetlands. On the other hand, a healthy river has high oxygen and low nutrient levels. These are water quality conditions needed by stonefly nymphs. If bloodworms are found in a river and the stonefly nymphs have disappeared, it might be a sign that the water is polluted. Water quality is also affected by all the particles that are carried by currents or suspended in the water. Sediments clog the gills and smother the eggs of both macroinvertebrates and fish. Soil erosion contributes to the sediments in a river. Along the banks of rivers and creeks, moisture-loving plants find a home in the riparian areas. This army of green plants defends our water quality. They stop sediments and runoff from reaching the water. They neutralize some toxins and use fertilizer residues. Healthy riparian areas protect the source of much of our drinking water. We have lost close to 80% of the original native prairie in Saskatchewan. Great herds of bison are gone. These grazers kept the prairie well healthy by providing just the right amount of disturbance to the grasses. The bison grazed intensely, removing plant matter that would have smothered the grasses over time. Then they moved on, leaving piles of dung behind for fertilizer. Without grazing, much of our native prairie cannot remain healthy. When it's not healthy, it cannot provide us with ecological services such as water purification, water storage, and flood control. Although there are more bison on the prairie today than there were 100 years ago, most of the grazers are now cattle. Grazing has to be done right, so range managers take care of many of our grasslands. Some range managers work for the government, but most are ranchers. They understand the relationship between soil, grasses, and cattle and base their management decisions on what is best for the ecosystem. This way, sustainable use of native prairie is possible. Ranchers are the stewards of much of Saskatchewan's native grasslands. If native prairie is not managed properly, the result can be overgrazed grasslands, wetlands, and riparian areas. The mix of plant species changes and invasive plants can take over. Soils lose their fertility and become more prone to erosion. Water quality can be affected. When drought strikes, the land has less ability to protect itself. That's why range managers focus on the soil and plants, not the cattle. After all, if the grasslands are healthy and productive, then cattle will be healthy and productive. Grazing systems are developed that alternate periods of grazing with periods of non-use in different parts of the pasture. Each system is customized to fit a particular location. Range managers need to know how the water cycle works as water travels through soils, grasses, and cattle. Much of Saskatchewan's rangeland receive less their average amount of precipitation more than 50% of the time, so it's very important to conserve water. Did you know you can conserve water with dead plant matter? It forms a layer on the soil around the living plants, blocking heat and wind that robs the soil of moisture through evaporation. If it's all removed, then the yield of grasses can be reduced by about 50% in some grasslands. Range managers keep a close eye on the amount of dead plant material and adjust the grazing pressure to keep it at a certain thickness. A beef cow drinks 25 to 75 liters of water each day, so it rarely grazes more than 2.5 kilometers from water. Traditionally, cattle can access any water supply in the pasture, which is not a problem when managed properly. But if cattle pollute their drinking water with their droppings, then they don't gain weight as quickly as they should. Today, with more cattle on the prairie, livestock producers are using other methods to provide clean water to cattle while protecting the source of our water. Cattle are attracted to riparian areas for water, food, and shelter. When ranchers provide water and shelter elsewhere, cattle spread out more, reducing overuse of the riparian areas and the possibility of water pollution. If alternate water sources are provided in the right locations, cattle may reduce their use of natural water bodies by 75 to 90%. Solar or wind-powered pumps can pump water from a source to a trough. Pasture pipelines can bring clean water from several kilometers away. So not only does healthy native prairie provide ecological water protection services, it provides ecological goods such as water and grasses for cattle. Range management makes both environmental and economical sense. So next time you drink a glass of water, think about the prairie in Saskatchewan watersheds, where cattle graze the prairie well, keeping it healthy and able to protect the sources of our water.